So as I previously mentioned, one of the main aspects of BIM is that now you will spend more time on the design process. And maybe some teams or enterprises are extremely accustomed to generating documentation pretty much instantly. Maybe they spend just a little amount of time on the design process and they try to generate the documentation as fast as possible. So one of the negative side effects that might be present within the BIM methodology will happen with little to no trust in the process. As a famous phrase says, trust in the process, because many different group projects might panic that they spend a lot of time in the design phase. Then they will say, okay, you know what, how about we give up on BIM? It's taking just way too long in the initial process. And now how about we just continue the process using AutoCAD. So keep in mind that if you are trying to implement BIM for the first time on a real project, which is also a project that is extremely urgent and has little to no flexibility for this experimentation, for this learning phase, I definitely wouldn't recommend you implement BIM in this case. Just keep in mind that the best way to implement BIM is to create a preliminary project for learning purpose, or talk with the client, communicate with the client. Okay, we're gonna make this with BIM, we are testing a new tool out, we will need some type of flexibility. Okay, so let's create a pilot project that, besides of accomplishing the main goals, has this amount of flexibility so we can try out the BIM methodology. So just keep in mind that this might happen if you don't trust the process. Your team and you might panic that you don't get the documentation straight away. Let's give up on BIM, and now this is going to be extremely ineffective. Instead of taking 100%, which was initially done with AutoCAD, now the process might take 150% or take us double as more time, and BIM will become something called as anti-BIM, and the process will be completely negative. So just keep in mind that the best way to implement BIM is throughout a pilot project that has the ability of offering you the experimental flexibility. Now, besides having the 2D CAD workflow, the BIM workflow and the anti-BIM workflow where we switch from BIM to CAD, you also have the idealized BIM versus BIM without templates, because the idealized BIM, we already said, it's going to take 70% of the CAD process. But since this is the first time you are going to work with BIM, doesn't matter if it's with Revit, doesn't matter if it's with ArchiCAD. Both Revit and ArchiCAD have the default template, which, yes, it will give you a lot of advantages, but if it's the first time, pretty much you are working without a defined template. So just keep in mind that if it's the first time, you straight away might not even notice a difference. It might be something as 95% of the CAD workflow, because we don't have a predefined template that will simplify the process. So to put it into perspective, throughout the course, this is what's going to happen. Since you are testing out BIM for the first time, you might spend extra time in the documentation process and a little bit less time on the design process. But there's no need to worry, because once you are done with your first project, now you can recycle pretty much the information to something as a templating process. Or you can even take some time, having learned all the different functions within ArchiCAD or Revit, doesn't matter, to generate your own template, which will include all the materials, all the composites, all the formats for the documentation. And once you are done with your template, maybe the second project will follow along the idealized version of BIM, but on the long term it might even be better than the idealized version of BIM, where you might even optimize your process and maybe even take 50% of the CAD workflow, and even so 30% if you include generative different types of processes, or maybe you have the best type of template for your workflow. So the marketers usually tell you, okay, idealized BIM, let's keep it that way, but from my own experience I know that you can have the negative side of BIM, but even the best side of BIM, where you optimize your time to work as much as twice faster or even 3 times faster than following the CAD workflow, which is completely possible with the generative tools, with the artificial intelligence tool, which is a more complex project that you are going to develop with the experience. But this is the main recommendation for the long term. And let's go back just for a second to this slide over here. As we already mentioned, BIM has a life cycle that you have to respect. So the main recommendation here is that once you are done with your first BIM project, the second project, the third project, doesn't matter how many projects, you always take some time to recycle as much information as possible into the templating process. So you can recycle the list of materials, you can recycle the formats, you can recycle the composite, the parameter definition, as much information as you can recycle so you get the best version of BIM on the long term. And for my own experience, I usually also work with a little bit of generative design, these artificial intelligence tools, using tools such as Grasshopper within Rhinoceros, which allow us to program different types of process. And if you implement this programming, this visual programming throughout Grasshopper or tools such as Dynamo with the BIM tools such as ArchiCad and Revit, you can even optimize your workflow 20, 40, 100 more times than the basic CAD workflow, because the generative design is going to give you not 1, not 2, but as much as 100 types of different projects, and you can program your algorithm as much as you want in order to optimize this to the limit. So keep in mind that there are many amazing tools that will keep evolving and keep optimizing your BIM workflow as much as possible. So in the next lesson, we're going to continue now just commenting a little bit about the maturity levels of BIM